I got this new modeler, man. I got this preset for Metallica. Dude, it's gonna sound sweet. That sounds nothing like Metallica. So you bought into this whole amp modeling thing. You've watched countless YouTube videos, and you've even posted some Facebook groups those typical pre-sales questions. Hey, I'm coming from a tube amp. Is this amp modeling thing worth it? What should I get? Helix, Fractal, Kemper, Bias, all those same questions. I know this is basically me in every piece of gear that I buy. I become so obsessed with it, I research the heck out of it. And in my mind, I've got this picture of how it's going to be. And then I finally get it, and I'm disappointed because I've hyped it up so much. So I wanted to do this video to help others avoid what I went through when I first got my Helix a couple of years ago. I had come from a traditional tube amp, and playing live, it was just like it's a totally different thing. So what I want to do is I want to cover some basics to get you up and running as fast as possible, and explain some common terms that you'll hear everywhere out on YouTube, over on Facebook groups, everything. And it can be overwhelming, but in the end, I think it's worth it. And if you take a step back and start real simple, I think you'll get the hang of it. So remember, this video is not meant as an in-depth guide to all the ins and outs of every modeler. In this case, the XFX3. This is not one of those videos. This is a beginner video for those people that are just getting into amp modeling. So this may be old news to a lot of you guys, but you may learn something in the process. But it can apply to any amp modeler that you choose. So I want to cover 4 basic things. First one is I want to explain cabinet simulations, or IRs, impulse responses. The next term that you're going to hear a lot is FRFR, or flat range, flat response. The third thing is going to be Fletcher Munson Curve. And the fourth thing I want to cover are gig-ready presets. Before we get into anything, be sure you hit that subscribe button, click that notification bell, or leave a comment below. The first thing I want to tell you is read the manual. It doesn't have to be the whole manual, but generally there's some sort of quick start just to get you up and running fast. So I know you want to dig in, but even if you just grab some basic concepts from the manual about the unit, it's better than posting that question to one of the groups. And what do we generally see when you've asked the same question? The presets, they're a good starting point, and they give you some examples of the things you can do, but to get the most out of the unit, I would totally suggest that you do your own presets. So I mentioned the Helix earlier. I mean, truthfully, that's not my first one. The old kidney bean Line 6 one was my first amp modeler, and those presets were pretty bad. It's all subjective. My ear is not your ear, and this is just how I approach things. I'm not a preset guy, but you might be a preset guy. But I will tell you this, you'll get closer to a good amp tone if you keep it really simple, and I know I keep saying that. But that's how you started out from the beginning, most of you probably. An amp, a combo, amp, cabinet, your guitar, plugged straight in. It wasn't until later when you got some more money that you could actually add those effects and figure out where to put them. But that's what I want to show you with this. Let's start out with something that's just like the real world. Let's start out with an amp and a cabinet. And then maybe we'll sprinkle some effects later. So first I wanted to talk about cabinet simulations, or impulse responses, IRs, right? You'll see that in a lot of forums. You'll see people talking about that on the Facebook groups and YouTube, and you know, you get the point everywhere else. So you may be like, I have no idea what this is. You may be in the same situation I was at with the Helix, where I had no idea what they were talking about. I knew about cabinets because, you know, all the Line 6 stuff, you know, how you could change cabinets and change the mic and the room settings and stuff, but everybody was telling me, hey, get these IRs and it'll sound so much better. In the case of the Helix, I found it to be a quicker way to get to where I wanted to be. That's not saying that you can't tweak the stock cabs, and there's a huge debate about that, and there are a number of people like Chad Boston's put a few videos out about it. Jason Sadidas, I think that's how you pronounce his name, sorry Jason if I butchered it, they talk about, you know, tweaking the cabinet models that are built into the Helix. I just found, again, quicker way to get to where I wanted to be by loading my own impulse response. So impulse responses, or IRs, are basically a sound measurement that takes into account the conditions around a guitar cabinet speaker. So, room, mic preamp, everything that's not related to amp tone as far as like reproducing an amplifier. It's not that. So it's basically a snapshot of a certain configuration. So you may be used to a mic'd cabinet, right? Of a 57 or a 57 and 121, mixed, or your other favorite microphone, 414 or 421, the Sennheiser stuff. So, it's that snapshot of that cabinet at that moment. So that means that IRs can vary greatly between the people who are creating those impulse responses. Ownhammer is one of the companies. Celestion makes their own, and of course, there's tons of other independent guys like your York Audio, your ML Sound Lab, stuff like that that's in the Axe-Fx there. Helix has the Line 6 built-in cabinets that they've created on their own. So I highly recommend that you experiment on your own and mess with the stock speaker simulations, and also maybe go out and buy a cab pack or something. I know that there's plenty of resources to do that, and YouTube, of course, shows plenty of reviews with that. But the IR, or in the cabinet block, is, I think, one of the most important, overlooked pieces of amp tone. So I'm sure you want to see something dialed in. Everybody's got their own amp modeler. This happens to be an Axe-Fx 3. So I'm going to add a cabinet. Of course, I usually add the amp first, but it doesn't matter. But we're going to add the amp. And then I just want to show you how you can pick different IRs. So here's basically what it looks like on the Axe-Fx. And you can pick different mic placements. A lot of these cab packs will actually have like mic combinations in a folder, and you can kind of pick between whatever ones you want, or a lot of individual mics. And one might be cap, cone, cap edge like you see here, or off axis, to kind of give you that sound that you want. So it's just some experimentation on your part to find the right one. So I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to pick this one from ML Sound Lab. This is the USA Traditional 57. This is based off of like a rectifier cabinet, I believe. So the 57 mic is the Shure SM57. That's super popular in every venue you go to. Generally, your cabinet's going to get mic'd with a 57. I guess we can keep it on this Friedman BE V1. So on the Helix, you can actually switch it within the amp block to turn HBE mode on. On here, they've modeled separate settings here. So I'm going to, we're on the BE, which is the lower gain. And I say lower, it's still a lot of gain. And I think that a lot of the tones on the Axe-Fx especially, you can just grab the amp, grab the speaker cabinet, and get a usable sound. Helix, honestly, it took me a little longer to dial it in. It doesn't mean you can't match it like this. I don't have a Kemper, so I can't speak for that, which Kemper is a different technology. The second thing that I wanted to talk about before we actually get into dialing this up would be FRFR. So this term, FRFR, is can be somewhat of a marketing term. I don't think I heard that term until I started messing with modelers, And basically it was just, hey, plug into the PA, and then all of a sudden I saw this post that come out, and hey, have you used an FRFR? And I had no idea what they were talking about. Basically, just think of it like as a PA speaker. When you're using your monitors, from venue to venue, those are going to be flat range, flat response as well. But like this one here, the ASM12 can be, it's got a hole in the bottom. You can actually turn it up on its side like it shows here, and you can use it as a PA speaker. And I've done that. So when I run live, honestly, I turn it up. So if you look at this configuration here, I tried it, as a wedge, and it was just blasting my ears. And so, you got to think about when you're playing live, your cabinet is generally behind you, and that's how I'm used to playing. It doesn't mean that that's the right or wrong way to have it, but it's just preference. So when you turn it up on its side and put it behind you, it kind of feels like a regular guitar cabinet a little bit. So that's why I use it in that way. So this one in particular was designed and voiced for these types of things, like the Axe-Fx that says Kemper Profiler in the Line 6 HD series, but it's an old, I think it's an old description. It's about 50 pounds, so it's kind of painful, so I use a dolly to lift it in and out of the venues. So you can read more up on this, but the point is I wanted to show you what you would see when someone talks about FRFR, and you know, there's plenty of other brands out there. In regards to dialing in tones, I think this is the best way to do it. So let's go into this Fletcher Munson curve. So the Fletcher Munson curve is just more of a phenomenon than anything. It's the way we perceive sound at and frequencies at different volume levels. And this is the thing that will bite you in your presets. And it happens, it's not just for modelers. This is a phenomenon that affects mixing as well as any other live sound. When you've dialed in stuff at a lower volume setting and then you all of a sudden turn it up or put it in the PA or even dial it in headphones or some other you know, device. Once you get it in the PA, you're like, this sounds terrible. Let's talk about dialing in those tones. With the Fletcher Munson curve, when you dial in something at a lower volume, there's going to be less lows and highs. The mid-range is going to be more pronounced. I use a pair of Yamaha HS7 monitors here at my desk. If I dial in something at a lower volume, which is normally how I'm playing, I tend to it tends to be overly bright, and that isn't at a lower volume. It sounds great. It's nice and crunchy, and all the EQ is where I need it. As soon as I plug into a PA, it's terrible because now I've turned the volume up. Even on the, like I said, on the ASM 12, as soon as I turn up, it becomes like ice picks in my ears. I mean, they're just daggers. And so generally when you're dialing in your presets, you either have to turn the volume up, and I'm not saying, most people say gig volume, but I find with my setup personally, I can get to just a louder volume, and once I hit that, there's a certain threshold that I hit, and after I turn up any louder, it really sounds just more loud. I think your mileage may vary as you dial in it to your setup, but you definitely need to turn the volume up to dial in sounds for live use. And then you'll come back at a lower volume and you're wondering where all your highs and your lows went. And just understanding the Fletcher Munson thing will help you even in an emergency situation, and being aware that your lows and your highs are going to come through, so you can be ready to take your treble, presence, depth is one setting I've seen on amps that seems to be more pronounced, and your low frequency, and just have those ready to just dial down. And of course this affects, if you're running in-ears, it affects your in-ears, but you can compensate for that if you have your own personal mixer, or you have a like I use these PowerPlay 16s, which are the Behringer, in the studio, and I'm able to dial my in-ears a little bit now, and live I'll use them as well, especially for this heavier church gig that I do. We have P16s all around. If I were to take these with another band, I would have to find some other solution to dial that in, either running a separate output from the Axe-Fx, which you can run two different outputs, and one would be EQ'd for my in-ears, and then one would be EQ'd a little less bright for the PA output, because the in-ears, it will tend to be a little dull. So I want to bring up my live preset, and then let's try, I'm going to go back and forth. So this is a live one. It's got a little bit of slapback on it. I say a little bit, that's quite a lot. But, so you got to be careful. Whatever sounds great in your in-ears, sometimes it's coming out in that PA. What I've got here is a live preset that I've got dialed in. And I think when you start to do things this way, you're going to notice that it's going to train your ear to dial them in a little bit duller, if that's a correct word. And because just by playing out, even recently, playing out live and using my Friedman FRFR to dial in the presets, I've gotten used to, my ear starts to get trained, even at home, at lower volumes, my presets are less bright. So I'll go back to some old presets even that I thought were great, and then I just can't, they're just too bright now. So I think as you start using this method, you'll find that it works well. Not to say that if you're doing some recordings that it won't need to be tweaked, because in a mix it may sound different when you're recording something. But the same thing applies when you crank that mix up. You may find that that setting that you dialed in at a low volume is way too bright. So just try it, try it on your own and try to dial in your mix a little with a less presence, less treble, back the lows off a little bit, and then see how things go. I promise you it'll be a good foundation at least for live use. This is based off of the Friedman BE100, and this is the lower gain model. I say lower gain model, this is the lower gain setting, the HB. So you can hear that can be perceived as a little muddy, but live it cuts right through. I got a little drive on here. Tighten things up a bit, give me a little more gain. So what I wanted to do is come back to this basic strip down preset and start fresh. And we can dial it in, which it's not going to take much for this. Like I said, the Helix, you can get there. I think it's going to take a little bit of tweaking. But remember that cab block, how important that can be. So this brings us to the next thing, which I didn't want to have something where it says, okay, here's your gig ready preset, go. Okay, because it really does take you tweaking it. And I think that's the best thing that you can do. Take your own hardware and think about these concepts, the Fletcher Munson curve, in cab selection, mic selection, and go dial stuff on your own. But start simple and start with just an amp and a cab. So out of the box, that's my favorite word, out of the box is the Friedman BE with the traditional cab, which this is based off of the Recto cab with a 57. I'm assuming it's vintage 30s, but you guys can correct me. So my recommendation is that you immediately start out with your FRFR plugged in. If you're making presets for live use, don't grab one that you've been using and then start tweaking it, because what can happen is you're going to have loud volumes. You're going to need to take breaks because at least your wherever it's at, your left or your right ear is going to get fatigued, and you're going to start dialing in frequencies that may not be there because your ears are getting fatigued. So you got to take some time, and you need to have some time on your hands to really work with this. So I would take the amp, the cab, start out with that, plug in your speaker, then start dialing from there. And watching the frequencies here, everything's up the middle, and every amp is different, so you're going to have to drop certain frequencies out of there. It's going to be really hard for me to simulate to you, the viewer, FRFR and how to dial in. You're just going to have to trust me and plug your stuff in and dial it that way. Don't start out in your in-ears, don't start out with your headphones, and don't start out low volume on your monitors just because you think your monitors are the best on the planet and say, these sound great, and then dial them into your monitors. I guess it depends on the monitors that you buy. So we've talked about a gig ready preset. That's the first thing you need to handle, is coming in here and thinking about that Fletcher Munson. I know I keep mentioning it, but that's super important. So once you've used this method of keeping it super simple, because every amp modeler has all these things that you can mess with: output EQ, preamp. I can change the preamp tubes, the power amp tubes. Let's, in the beginning, as when you first get an amp modeler, just stick with the main tone controls. The last thing I want to say about all of this in modelers is you can fall just like me in the trap of saying, I want to emulate exactly what I hear from this amp or this amp, and we've got a competition of, well, what one sounds more like the real thing or whatever. But I was watching this video with Sinister Gates, and he was talking about Avenged Sevenfold using the modeler. You know, rather than try to mimic the same sounds you hear from amps, use these modelers to create your own sound, to create your own tone. If it sounds good, who cares if it sounds like the original amp? Does it sound good to you? Do people come up to you afterwards and say your tone was killer? If you liked it and you thought it sounded great and it sounded great in the mix, it really doesn't matter. Use these modelers as a creative tool to craft your own sound. So with all that said, I hope you got something out of this. I hope it was informative, just even a little bit, to where it maybe demystified some of those terms for you. We can dig in later and actually, dial in some presets further, but this should help you getting ready for those first few gigs with your modeler and understanding those things that you might come across. So make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell to get notified when I put a new video out, and leave a comment and let me know what you thought. Thanks.